Oh, we got it. She got it going. Okay, so we're starting recording. We have at least one new participant and a couple of the presenters. So I'll just say this is a summer online teaching workshop that is started by CITL, which is the Center for Innovation in Teaching, Assessment, and Learning. And CITL right now is made up of myself and Gina Rue and Ed Finn, who couldn't be here today because he's not feeling well. But the important part is our three presenters. So this session is on new ways to grade. And Mandy Brobst-Renaud from Theology is going to talk about having her students choose different tracks and that you're graded differently depending on which track you chose. Luke Venstrom from Mechanical and Bioengineering is going to talk about competency-based testing and how that's used in not just his classes, but I think more widely in the department. And then Paul Smith is going to talk a bit about specifications grading and how he uses that in his chemistry courses. So that's the agenda. And the format is that our three presenters are going to each talk for about 5 minutes or so about the area that they're specialized in. And then the three of them are going to have a conversation about what they just heard, maybe talk across, since their topic is grading, so there'll be some common elements they want to discuss. And then the last third will be questions from all of us. So that's the overall format. And I'll ask the three presenters who wants to go first.
I can go.
Okay, take it away, man.
I can figure out share screen better this time than last time. I've clearly been tinkering a lot in the classroom over the past few years, and it's been quite a lot of fun. So I recently started, I'm going to move us over here. Basically, over time, I began teaching theology really traditionally, right? So students would take exams at the end of each unit, they would write a paper, and essentially I have changed those practices so much so that I'm not sure I'm ever going back, and I'll share why. So when we came, I think I came 6 years ago, and we've been through two related but separate general education conversations. And we're faced with the question as a theology department, what theology contributes, really contributes to higher education when its historical role is no longer compelling for our students and colleagues of diverse backgrounds. Theology doesn't work for everybody, and it's not an obvious value to everybody at the university. So this kind of led me down a rabbit hole. So take the general education conversation and then combine it with COVID-19. And COVID-19 for me really clarified what mattered, and what mattered ended up shaping what I decided to do to measure grades. So I ultimately realized that I did not care if students could list the patriarchs of the Old Testament in order. I just fundamentally am uninterested if they're able to answer a multiple choice exam. And if you look at Bloom's taxonomy, I have a copy of it somewhere, a multiple choice exam is actually the least sophisticated way to measure learning, especially in a theology course. So I wanted to decide what mattered, and I actually kind of wrote it out. I did the classic backward design. So I divided this into institutional contribution and student characteristics. So I wanted to see resilience, grit, curiosity, lifelong learning. And I think as an institution, it's amazing what we can let go of when we've got nothing to lose. I started in 2018, and our institution has been very dynamic since 2018. And this is my normal in academia. So I've learned to kind of bob and weave. What do we want to contribute to students? Practical skills, knowledge of themselves as a learner, opportunities to collaborate. And I wanted to invite creativity, humor, and independent investigation. Also to remind them that learning is fun. I noticed that a lot of times students go through the K-12 system in all of its forms and just kind of come to class expecting to be bored, which is really hard for me. Like I don't want students to come to school to be bored. So what I did is I ensured parity with workload with my colleagues in the department. I clarified what I cared about students learning, which you saw in the previous slide. I polled students for how they learned best in a pre-class survey, and then I experimented. So exams became collaborative learning environments such as digital escape rooms, and papers became opt-in opportunities for students based on how they learn. This is also in some ways based on game theory and universal design in terms of its theoretical underpinnings. So students would be faced with decision. They would decide whether they wanted to do a unit-based assignment, which would be kind of a big picture assignment over the whole unit, or a daily based assignment where they would reflect kind of in a shorter assignment on the topic of the day. And then they'd have to decide if they wanted to express what they learned creatively or academically. Another thing I noticed in student papers, to create a good thesis, a student needs a good hypothesis. To have a good hypothesis, student has to have a good question. In order to have a good question, a student has to be curious. And so what I realized is when I was seeing papers that were frankly mediocre, it wasn't a failure on the student's part to write a good paper. I think it was a failure on my part to entice students to be curious and to actually educate them through each of these constituent parts. So I reframed Theo 200 to think of the task in Theo 200 is to get curious about what you're learning, with the idea that once students hit their upper division class, wherein they'll need to write papers, sometimes longer ones, if they can get curious, they can think of a good question, and that can be the basis of a good thesis and therefore a good paper. So the requirements, I also changed what students see when they see a rubric. Instead of saying A, B, C, D, this is a perfect score. It's above and beyond. That signals to students that I want them to dig deep. One thing I noticed about students is they're very good at ticking boxes, but they're not really good at independently digging deeply for their own sense of excellence. I want to cultivate in students that the confidence that when they turn in an assignment, the grade is just a formality. They know when they've performed excellently. And so this has helped students recognize how to pursue their own sense of excellence. So basically what happens when students play to their strengths through choosing longer assignments or shorter assignments and creative or academic, what I noticed is that students invested more in their work. It also became more sophisticated. They seemed to be learning more, and they began to complain about how long homework was taking because they got into it, which I took as a win, and that made me happy. So they can just do the work. So basically at the end of unit, there are 3 options. They can engage big questions and ideas. They can do 5 shorter reflections, or they can engage one topic in depth. Each of these is worth 100 points. So basically what I ended up seeing is students did things like wrote an Old Testament newspaper, which was 8 single-spaced pages, 3 were required. I'll drop that in the chat. It's amazing. Students would also ask, would it be okay if, and engaging really interesting ideas. This summer, I had a student ask if he could write on the top 5 questionable choices God makes in the Old Testament, which is really fantastic. And students developed an imagination for the biblical world, which for me completed the learning aims in some ways, I think, better than exams or tests could have. That was a little long, I apologize.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you, Mandy. Okay, so Paul, Luke, who wants to go next?
I could probably
Okay, take it away,
from
Paul.
here. All right, where's the button? Oh, not that one. All good?
Okay.
All right. To the extent that I can give an abstract for a talk that should take 5 minutes, hopefully I don't kill the whole session, but as a STEM teacher for individual introductory chemistry classes, I definitely started out on what you might think as the typical mold for a STEM class, which is to say that exams are 50% on average of maybe the whole course grade, and that you would take it individually. I have just finished the move to a new format where I do not offer individual exams anymore, and to the extent that you call them exams, they are collectively less than 15% of a contributions to a student whole course grade. So I want to kind of highlight how I did that, and then if we have time, because obviously this is more than just exam grading, there's a whole kind of infrastructure that I try to put around it, that how this kind of whole thing works. So let's talk about, this is very low stakes, because again, the extent that I give exams, the combined value of an exam, at least in this course, is less than 15%. So this is the highest of the low stakes thing that you would do. So you write your test, but you don't put all the questions all on one page. You instead scatter them throughout the room. So test question 1 might sit on a table, a copy of test question 1 might sit on another table somewhere else, etc. And then you tell students go to these tables, and when they get there, they meet a partner. And for the next 10 minutes, that is their authorized aid to do whatever they would like regarding answering that question. And then 10 minutes later, they get up and they go to a copy of the question that they haven't seen before, and they meet someone new there. And you can rinse and repeat, and we've basically optimized this to the extent that I do this, but I run a total of 4 questions, 40 minutes in total, plus extra time to let them kind of pick up and move and get situated and that kind of thing. So this is, in essence, speed dating, right? It's this concept that you get a rotating cast of people to help you. And really, this is kind of my overall philosophy in terms of how I actually assess people, right? Because on the one hand, if I'm assessing this person and their ability to get a log across a stream, there's a lot of ideas that they might come up with, some better than others. A student might get an answer a 15-point question. Maybe I judge them to get 7 or 8 out of that. Or if they come up with a new way to solve it, maybe I'll be like, all right, what exactly grade do I give them? But in reality, what I wind up doing in this format is I take that percentage away and I grade the question pass fail. And so basically the student for whom there's an exact copy of their work from at least someone else in the class, so this also saves me time, I basically look for a threshold of, did we kind of get there or not? So it changes the guesswork from me to them kind of saying, come up with an answer and tell me if you make it or not. And that's just a lot faster for me in that it puts them into groups and streamlines the process that way. So 4 questions, pass, fail, and that's the gist. So naturally the burning question is, how do I know it's not this, right? I'm going to pass a student who kind of got carried. Here's my actual data that suggests that because they are rotating the partners so many times, that eventually you kind of see, or at least the hypothesis is, that a good student doesn't matter who they're paired with, and a bad student, you kind of need them to be with someone good or else they're not going to get it right. I've plotted on the x-axis the average, what I call modules, not exams. Again, it's out of 4. And when we kind of have them do together, on the x-axis is what they'd get out of about 12 partners. And on the y-axis, the only individual thing that I have them do is the final exam at the end of the year. I tell them you're kind of on your own up until the very end, or only at the very end. And that's where I finally get a sense of what they can do individually. And it's a straight line that points in the right direction. There is a correlation, which is really the point of what I wanted to get across, is that every time I've tried this, I have generally seen that in general, if someone does well, no matter who their partner is, that means they're probably going to do good on their own. And that's generally what I've seen. Same idea here. So here on the x-axis is how students entering my course, taking other chemistry elsewhere, how they were doing kind of coming in, versus on the y-axis, when I put them through this group work in general, what they got. And I just want to highlight that in general, it's kind of the same trend. There's still a positive line. I do generally see grades kind of compressed to an average rather than be spread out. That's kind of how things have generally worked. I can also prove that there's no grade inflation. You might imagine if I take away really hard exams, that I might just substitute this in reality and wind up doing that. That hasn't generally been true. I piloted the format 2 years ago, And I've moved full the state to low stakes this year, and I'm pretty confident. Maybe statistics people will kill my data. I don't care that I do care, but we can get to that later. But I've generally not seen really any essence in terms of this whole shift in terms of what I'm assessing people on, in terms of on average how I feel like I assess people. Maybe that's a good or bad thing. Maybe we can debate that later. That's kind of up to that. But I at least wanted to communicate that I generally feel like I have a sense that I can pick out really what STEM people who are what a lot we're interested in is who's strong versus who's not, without actually ever giving them a written exam to do on their own. I have other things here, but I'll end early and maybe we can I get to that later on if we need to.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. Okay, and then Luke.
All right. So as Cindy mentioned, I'm going to talk about an approach to assessment called competency-based assessment. It's kind of nestled inside of a broader framework that goes by many different names. It's gone by competency-based learning or mastery-based learning or skills-based learning. And I'm going to focus on my approach in one particular class, but I've actually adapted this for other classes that I teach, and other faculty in the college now have adapted this same idea for their courses. And I have to start by saying this was not originally my idea. Anne Reich, who was here in the Civil and Environmental Engineering department and is coming back this next year, is who really brought this to the college, and was doing it for a course different than what I'm doing it here, in a different way. But she really started the conversation around this approach to teaching and also doing assessment. And the main motivation, I would say, behind this move was to try to improve retention, particularly in the first 2 years, and in particular of students who are traditionally underrepresented in engineering. And I think that for me, I have not seen a more successful approach, pedagogical approach in my 10 years here than competency-based learning or assessment in achieving that outcome. So I've been really, really pleased with it, and I plan to continue doing it until someone shows me something better, right? The downside is to a competency-based approach is it often requires more investment of time on the faculty's side. And there is sometimes some initial student resistance. And what I have actually ended up implementing in the course I'm going to tell you about today, which is a freshman level statics course, a very foundational course that feeds into essentially all of the engineering programs here, is more like a hybrid approach. I'm going to show you kind of a flow sheet logistically of how it works. But the big idea is I take an exam, a traditional exam, which normally would have been graded on a partial credit basis. So like Paul's slide where it was the log roller, and I say, well, I need you to get across the river and you got about 80% there. So I guess I'll give you an 80% score on this question, and then that would be it. The downside of that is that I don't want students to walk out of my course with an 80% understanding of how to do statics. It's perhaps the most important discipline feeding into all kinds of like future courses, but also their practice as engineers. Basically it's how we make sure that the things that we build stay standing and don't fall down. And so you don't want the person building your bridge, oh, they got about a 75% on that, how to calculate the load in that load bearing member. I guess that's good enough. No, we want complete understanding. And so that's another objective, I'd say, in this approach, is trying to help students see that they can achieve a complete understanding. And it's helped to achieve a sense of belonging, I'd say, in the students too, because at the end, they recognize that they get it. Like they don't just partially get it, they actually get it. So here is how it works. I have exams with 4 questions. I take 2 of the questions and make them partial credit, and 2 of the questions follow the format that I'm about to show you. So it starts with an initial attempt by the student, and before they're doing the exam, of course, they get instruction. So and statics is very unit-based and module-based. I can break it down into very isolated chunks of skills. And so on a skill, I might give them a brief lecture. I show them examples of how to execute that skill, and then give them the opportunity to practice that together in small groups. So they're doing active learning in advance of being assessed on the skill. And then they're assessed, and it's a problem on the exam. And one of two things can happen after this assessment. So one, they can succeed. That's great. And they're provided an incentive to succeed the first time, because I actually reward them by giving them 110% of the point value. So for example, if it's a 25-point question on the exam, they actually receive 27 points for getting it right the first time. Of course, they might not get it right the first time. That's okay. If they fail, then they move on to attempt number 2. But in the intervening time, I have an intervention. So what I do is I provide them with a video where I detail how to work the problem correctly so that they can compare with their own work and figure out what the heck went wrong. And once they've done that, then they can move on to their second attempt at completing a problem of a similar type. It's not the same problem. It's just a problem that tests the same skill. And it happens usually about a week later. And I have time set up to do this. And then they take the problem. And again, there are two outcomes. They can succeed. And if they do, I say, great, you got it. You have 100%. Like, there's no penalty for you having missed the first time. You got exactly the same score as if you'd gotten it the first time. It's also possible that they fail a second time, and that happens. And if that's the case, they go on to a third attempt. And in the third attempt, there's another intervention. So here, they can't just watch a video. They actually have to meet with a peer tutor from the HESI Center, which is the Academic Success and Support Center in the College of Engineering, or meet with me. And we figure out what's going on. What's the hang up? What's the hurdle that we have to get over for you to achieve this skill? And after they've done that, then they can move on to their third attempt, which happens again about a week later. And here they can succeed again. And if they do, then they still get 90% of the points possible. So they're walking away with 23 out of 25 points that's applied to the exam. And it's possible that they can fail a third time. It's pretty unusual, but it's possible. And then what I tell them is, okay, if you meet with me and we sit down together, and in that meeting, we can figure out what was going wrong, and you can demonstrate to me that you've acquired the skill and you've faithfully followed the process, I'll still reward you 50% of the points. And so the impact of this, I'll show you in a moment, because I've been collecting data for 2 years now, is it really improves student outcomes. So here's the data I'll share. This is, I give 3 midterm exams in the course. And so you're looking at an average success rate across both of the competency-based problems in both of the years on the 3 exams. And I've aggregated the data into 3 groups. You have all of the students lumped together. I've picked out just the students that identify as women, and then I have students that identify as Black, Indigenous, or people of color. So you're looking at blue for the BIPOC, this reddish orange for the women, and the yellow color for overall. What you can look at for the 3 exams, left to right, you see the stair step, because these are the percent of students that are successful after their first attempt, their second attempt, and their third attempt. So every student is increasing, right? You expect that to happen. And in the end, in all 3 exams, I end up with close to 90% success rates. So for 138 students, that's a lot of students that are walking out with not just a partial understanding of the concept, but a complete understanding. But what's most striking to me, in looking at the data, what I want to point out, compare the gap between all of the students and the blue bar for the BIPOC students in attempt number 1, and how that gap closes by attempt number 3. And so for me, this is perhaps the most important outcome of this particular approach, is that it's demonstrating that we are being successful in closing a gap. And what I think we're addressing here is the reality that even students that meet our admission criteria, right, they're coming to us from very different backgrounds. And there are some students that may not have had the same level of academic preparation that other students have had. And this approach is helping to address that inequity of where the students are coming at from the get-go, and helping these students catch up, sort of, without any delay, or there's no remedial classes here. We're just teaching the same stuff, but providing students additional opportunities to demonstrate that they have acquired the skill. And I think it's working. So that's what I have for you.
Right. Thank you very much, Luke.
Yep.
So let's see. Once Luke has stopped sharing his screen. There we go. All right, so this is the part where the three presenters get to ask each other questions, and we bring up, I definitely see some commonalities and some common goals for these three different kinds of grading. So go ahead and talk amongst yourselves, presenters.
So it's, I think Paul and I, coming from STEM, you saw data and you saw sort of logistics of how it happens, but because that's our brains work. So Mandy, my question for you is, I got a sense of kind of the gears of how you do it, actually do your thing.
Mhm.
It seems to me like managing all of these different, you can choose this, or you can choose this, or you can choose this, and trying to keep that all straight would add a lot of time to the instruction. So is that true, or have you figured out a way to make it work without, additional effort?
So it doesn't take any longer than grading. It's actually less time than grading 35-page papers that the students wrote before they were due that they didn't want to write. It's far more efficient. Because I go in Blackboard and I go into needs grading, and the rubric is already, I've populated Blackboard with the rubric. So I just complete the rubrics for the students. So it's not any more time. I don't know how this would work in other departments or fields, but I think that the skills, like engineers who know how to play to their strengths when they're at an organization and their boss is asking them to volunteer for something. I hope that students who've had my course have practiced knowing the sorts of things they want to say yes to and volunteer for in ways that help improve and strengthen the organization. So students will learn if they prefer long range thoughts, thinking about one thing for a long time, or if they like thinking about a lot of little things in real time. But yeah, so grading isn't really any more cumbersome than the students will, in Blackboard, I have 3 separate columns based on what the students choose. They'll use that submission link, the rubric in the submission link corresponds to the assignment that they're doing. And then I use weighted grades in Blackboard. So I'll actually input that score into a different column. And that column is what's part of the weighted column. So they'll have the one they submit, I exempt the others. It doesn't play into the weighted column at all. It's the one that I input all of the scores into, that actually goes into the student's grades. So a little bit of Blackboard gradebook wrangling, but it's not my strong suit. And if I can figure it out, honestly, I really think anybody can.
Kind of a question I have for both of you. I've always been kind of fascinated with external versus internal motivation of students, right? We motivate them externally by dangling credit in front of their faces, but we kind of want them to be internally motivated just to learn, to know how to learn. But I feel like, and I think that's true, but also I think that we kind of do need to dangle some sort of external motivation in the event that they feel like they lack internal motivation. And I've especially struggled, I think, with seniors, because then you're struggling with senioritis. And then, so do you treat seniors at all any differently from intro classes, or is there anything that you do differently from? Because I know that I talked about like doing my stuff's for the first 2 years, Luke's for the first 2 years, Theo probably the first 2 years, right? No,
They kick it down the road. Those engineers kick it down the road. Juniors and seniors taking my Theo 200 class, Luke.
Makes it more fun,
right? Internal motivation is a real, like, Theo, 100% of students in my class are there because they have to be. So I don't have majors. So the internal motivation is rare, even for my students who identify with the Christian tradition. Yeah, I'm not in a field that gets to assume any kind of internal motivation or extrinsic payoff. So.
Yeah, in engineering, you would think in engineering that you wouldn't have internal motivation problems, because when you're taking courses that in principle you are applying in your professional life very directly, that students would be like, I want to know everything possible. But we see, I'd say, particularly in the third and fourth years, the same type of a drop off where a student maybe has figured out, yeah, mechanical engineering is pretty broad. I like manufacturing. I don't really like the thermal sciences. I don't like fluid mechanics. And so in a course like that, I have to try to motivate those students in addition to the ones that like manufacturing. And I think Mandy's point about curiosity is the important thing. Is I try to create those upper level courses built around curiosity and helping them to ask interesting questions that they get to ask in project-based learning and things like that, where they have some say over what they're learning, or at least they think they have some say over what they're learning, is really important for that internal motivation.
I think the juniors and seniors that take my classes, there's some sort of change that happens, I think, between sophomore and junior year, because generally speaking, the juniors and seniors show up and they're like, all right, what are you going to teach? What do you got? Like, they're kind of ready to learn and engage. And freshmen and sophomores seem to have more barriers to get there. And I'm also referring to students who made it through the COVID pandemic. And so they aren't quite used to the academic environment in the way that we, I guess, accidentally became entitled to prior to COVID-19. So. Paul, I'm curious with your speed dating, have you tried it with regular assignments or in-class activities? Do you build that skill throughout the semester so that the students know what to expect? Or is it just how you do exams? I'm just curious about how you could see this, if you could see us applying to other activities in the classroom.
Yeah, they definitely know what's coming ahead of time, and they kind of get mentally prepped for it. The major barrier, of course, is getting all the students a schedule that enables the algorithm to work at all, right? Like, I've got to make sure student X hits all 4 questions and then has 4 different partners and whatnot. I've generally had classes on the order of 25 people, but I'm going to try it for the 60-person class I have coming up. I'm sure that'll be a lot of fun. But I have to shout out Tiffany Kalba in math, who helped me write an algorithm where I could just have numbers that kind of worked it out, and then plug in, either give the students a number and then I never have to give them names anymore, or there's easy ways of making it so that on the instructor end it's pretty painless. And then yeah, they know it's coming, and I think it's the hardest thing that I have them do, kind of on that regard. And I think that, again, I've been pretty pleased to see that I genuinely do think you can generally find the strong students, at least kind of by that method. And I like it because they have a support system. And I think that yeah, we have the EPIC program here at Valpo, and they kind of overwhelmingly found that as long as you give students support systems for kind of everything, and I thought, why not exams? And it is something that can work, especially if you're in the ballpark of trying to keep things on the formative level rather than the summative. And that was overall the arching motivation there.
I want to throw in a question about the speed dating too, Paul, because it felt to me, you didn't mention this as one of your motivations for changing grading, but that it was maybe an attempt to also help the students socialize is the wrong word, but instead of you just quietly solving problems on your own and you either do well or you do poorly, this idea that you have to talk to somebody for every one of those little tables you put them at. And I wonder if you find that students value that and say things about it, that they actually learn that skill.
My sample size is kind of small, just because it's been only like 3 semesters I've been doing it. I had one year where they were a pretty strong cohort, but I had another year where definitely they came in and they weren't talking to each other very much. And by the end of the semester, I noticed that they were very chatty about it. So I only really have just anecdotes and the general sense that it worked, from that kind of forced, again, cohort building. Again, small sample size and anecdotes, but I think I support that. Absolutely.
Well, I think at this point, we can open it up to anybody who has questions. Either speak them or you can put them in the chat. Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I asked this in earlier sessions, and I'm curious your response from each one of you three. What has been the reaction or in student evaluations? How have they welcomed, embraced, celebrated, or disdained the change in how you're doing what you're doing? Anyone?
Yeah, I'll start. There are definitely students that resist this competency-based approach. So they view it as extra hurdles. You're making me do this again when I already did it on the first exam. I just want my 80%, please. But I'd say overall, that's a small number of students. I might get a comment here or there on an evaluation, and I might get more comments at the beginning of the year, but what I do is I show them the improvements to the average exam score.
Mm.
So after the first exam, I say, all right, the average after the first exam was a 72, but the good news is this is the floor. It only goes up from here. And then after all of the students finish the retakes after this, or the second time, I say, look, the average went from a 72 to an 81, and it's going to go up again after the next round. And then it goes from an 81 to an 86. And I think that they appreciate, collectively, they appreciate seeing that high average at the end. And that has helped, I think, to quell a little bit. And there are also some students that have told me, I'm so grateful that you gave me this second chance, right? I'm so grateful for the second chance to show you that I can do this. And so there is some resistance, but I'd say overall very positive.
So Luke, are they forced to do the retake? Like they scored an 80 the first time around. Do you make them take it the second attempt?
I don't know. I don't feel like I can make them. And I have, out of maybe 60 students, there might be one or two that maybe try the first time the retake and then they never do a retake again. And in that case, I tell them, the score that you earned is the score that you earned. It's, I am not going to make you do it, but you get the 0 because you didn't get it right. Because I do grade, I think I forgot to mention this, the competency-based questions are graded on a you got it right or you got it wrong. So I'm not giving partial credit. I'm looking to see if they have demonstrated the skill. Now I might, if I can tell that it's like they punched a number in their calculator wrong and that's why they put they reported a wrong number, I give them credit for that. I'm looking for mastery of the skill. And so small minor mistakes I let pass. But if I can tell that they didn't, they haven't acquired the skill, then I give them a 0. But it makes grading go faster. And that's how I've managed my time is I can grade the exam twice as fast. And now that I've got question bank built up, the amount of time it takes me to offer the retake questions has gone way down because I can grab one really, really quickly, print it out, and have it ready to go.
Cindy, I was going to offer up just for the question about internal or external motivation. The one little, when we went to the teaching conference over at IUSB, there were like 10 faculty that went, and there was a rapid fire thing where within an hour, everybody gave up and gave 5-minute little things. But one guy said he changed his grading structure to add in, I believe 10 or 15% of the overall score. And it was, you get this 10% when you decide to pick something that you would like to explore deeper. So he presented it better than that, but he said like, this is a introductory class or something where you cover a lot of ground and I won't spend all the time maybe you would really like on this topic and maybe you would like to go deeper in that. Come present to me what you would like to do, I'll okay it or not, and then you do it and you get the 10%. But it built in that internal motivation because it's something the students wanted to go study more. And he said the results, kind of like Mandy, were fabulous. Like people did more than they asked, asked of them because they just were able to dive into something they really wanted to dive into. So I thought that was kind of cool. And I could see adding that in to a grading and inspiring people to go forward, be curious, learn something that you like or would like to explore more.
I'll follow up on, I guess, Bob's question. I know that students are always anxious about exams, and I think that part of what my effort was to try to reduce that, at least to give them some help. They are definitely anxious about getting timed. There are aspects of, instead of one 50-minute exam, turning that into 4 10-minute mini exams. There are some who don't like that for sure. So I think coupling that with the low stakes really is the important part. If it were high stakes, it's definitely worse. I could probably give a really brief comment on, since this might be a decent thing and I probably won't kill the entire rest of the session, just on how this fits into everything else that I do. It's low stakes, so the general overall format of my class is that between all the labs that I have, we have about 50 days where I actually meet the students, so I grade them by day. I say every day is 2 points. And on some days that is exam day, and that's when we do the speed dating modules. But this is how I kind of fill the other 85% of my class. And the only thing that really matters is on that given day, I'm going to give you X amount of tasks to do. So I kind of call it like X pass. And you basically do better on the day if you do more stuff that demonstrates competency, to kind of parrot Luke's point about that. And it's really flexible. Like I can do it like, hey, if you did a pre-class quiz before the day, that's one thing. Some days it's worksheets where I just want to see you do a worksheet in front of me. That's fine. Participation credit, clicker questions. You could even burn it on like if you need fewer revisions, or so like your worksheet might not okay, but if you revise it later on and you don't do that too much, that's another thing that you can do, right? That's how the speed dating fits into the overall format. So this is the kind of thing that you couple with low stakes. And I will say that this format got insanely positive reviews. I've never seen more things on a class eval than people who graded that overarching format to everything. So the actual rollout of the speed dating, sure, that can be stressful. But that was really noticeable from student evals for me.
Yeah, I don't know if there was a huge change in like student evaluations. Those have been pretty stable because they don't always ask at like the ways, there's only like 2 questions on grading. But what I have noticed is student investment and their attitudes toward getting something out of a theology class have gone up. And so I think that that's really helpful, that students are actually looking for connections in theology, even if they don't identify with the Christian tradition and aren't curious about identifying with the Christian tradition. So, and I think that that's a win where all students kind of feel like they can succeed and play to their strengths in a course that many of them are nervous about taking.
I had a question for Luke. I was wondering, I know you say you do the competence base for one of the questions. Have you thought about going to a competence base for all your questions on the exam, or do you think that would be too much for the students?
Yeah, the challenge, I mean, I've thought about that, Jesse, but the challenge is in scheduling the retake, right? So I have to find a time the following week for these students to do the retakes. And the first time that I rolled this out, I had essentially like a student can choose the time. Then I was finding I was spending all of my time giving retakes, right? And so that was not going to be sustainable. So what I moved to was I scheduled the retakes during chapel break. I know it's not ideal. Students have other things that they're doing during that time, but it's a time that I knew no student had a class. And so I have a 20-minute window for them to do the retakes in. And so 2 questions is about the right number for that retake session.
Thank you.
I'm curious if any of the 3 of you, as you rolled out these different kinds of gradings, what did you hear from up above, like from your department chair, or even probably department chair, about these unusual kinds of grading? And were you supported? Were they skeptical?
I was fully supported because the department chair is the one that suggested I give it a shot. So it's easy.
I didn't know I was supposed to ask.
I believe I got 2 words. Good luck.
My department has been really, really supportive in all of my adventures in teaching and grading. So they've been really great about it. So long as it fits the aims of the department, and so long as I can demonstrate the connective tissue between what they're accomplishing academically, I haven't had any negative feedback.
Bob.
So thank you very much for sharing with us. I'm just curious, within your department, has your chair or your program manager encouraged or enticed or you to share your success or what you're doing right now? Have you done it with your department, your colleagues in your department?
I did a national presentation on this shift in grading a year or two ago, and I did that as one of our colloquia for the Theo department.
I had a little bit of this data ready for a conference as well on chemical education. But in terms of internal talk with the department, that's in the schedule for the near future, which I want to put in air quotes because, you know, sometimes we don't get to it.
We've talked about, we've definitely had these conversations in the meetings. I don't know that I remember sharing the data that I showed you all at a meeting, but our department has talked about this shift, and we've seen it implemented in again, it's been adapted. So every, members of the college are taking the idea and kind of making it work, tweaking it a little bit to make it work for their own course, for their own style. But it's received quite a bit of, I think people are liking it because they see the results.
Yeah, what drove my question was propagation within the department, as opposed to just being a one-off, that it actually becomes part of the culture. That was what I was most interested to find out. When people are asking you with your department, how's it going, taking a genuine interest, wanting to see the statistics, engaging conversation about it, that tends to suggest to me that there's interest in adopting, making it part of the culture of the department. Thank you for your answers.
I should add that there's a kind of a national movement around this, and I'm sure some of you guys were inspired by that. It's called ungrading, is the shocking name for it, but it includes various different kinds of grading. And so a lot of our faculty members have gone to conferences where they've been exposed to these ideas, and I think it's getting around.
My spouse is doing specs grading in CVA and is really, really liking it. Mm-hmm. So that's where students complete a certain number of tasks worth a certain number of points, and that forms your score. So it's in some ways related to mastery based, except it's more student choice in what grade they want. So it's like you complete this number of things for an A, this number of things for B, and so on. And so it really does empower student choice. I don't know what his feedback has been. I think he would have told me if it was really awesome or really terrible.
Mm-hmm. Was he by chance part of the faculty learning community on that topic?
He was in the AI group, so I don't think he was part of FLC.
Okay. Yeah, because there was a faculty learning community on that topic last year or the year before, and they spent the first semester looking into the different kinds, including specifications, grading, and other kinds, and then they started implementing it somehow in their classes. Other questions? Well, if there's no further questions, I think we can end a little early. Thank you very much to our three presenters, and thanks for also being brave enough to try this stuff. It's unconventional. It's not the way you were taught in grad school, and so it's pretty exciting to see the results in the students. So thanks again. As I said, I will share this recording with you when I get a copy. And thanks for taking a piece of your summer to learn something that you might be able to use in your classes.